poker's legendary champions, next generation stars, and tireless ambassadors of the game, sharing their wisdom and guiding your journey to high achievement on the green felt. This is Chasing Poker Greatness with your host, Brad Wilson.
What is happening, my friend? Welcome to another episode of the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast. As always, this is your host, the founder of ChasingPokerGreatness.com, Brad Wilson. And today's guest on the show is UCLA professor and author of Why Alex Beats Bobbie at Poker, developing a fundamentally sound approach at poker, Duncan Palamourdas. Duncan won my heart very early on in this conversation because he's a math guy who uttered the magical words, "People overestimate the usefulness of solvers. Be still my beating heart." Despite knowing very little about Duncan heading into our conversation, this episode is easily one of my favorite Chasing Poker Greatness episodes of all time, and you're about to quickly discover why. In today's episode, you're going to learn Duncan's concept of meta-humility and why it ought to be in every successful poker player's arsenal, how to evaluate any potential poker coaches you're going to hire for private lessons, why there's no one-size-fits-all methodology for reaching your maximum poker potential, and much, much more. So without any further ado, it is my honor to bring to you the brilliant, articulate, and dare I say, handsome Duncan Palamourdas. Duncan, good afternoon, my friend. How you doing?
Good afternoon to you too. I'm doing really well. How about yourself?
I'm doing very, very well. Looking forward to a massage in a couple of hours and this conversation that we're about to have.
Excellent. Likewise.
I start this show out by asking about your story.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell the listener how you got involved with cards?
Right. So my case is a little bit weird because I really like to play games, and I've been playing games since I was a kid. And I started with playing chess when I was 5 or 6 years old. As long as I remember myself, I'll be sitting in a corner, by myself playing, just reading the book and things like that. And surprisingly, actually, I wasn't born here. I was born in Greece, and I came here for graduate school. And when I was a graduate student, we started playing poker for fun with friends, nickels and dimes and things like that. And it started as a challenge for me to beat my friends because I'm very competitive. So I realized that there's more to poker than I initially had anticipated because, a little bit of Hollywood, makes you think that it's all about, staring, your opponent, to read the results and things like that. So one thing led to another. I studied the game, and because of my math background, I'm actually a math professor. I'm teaching mathematics. I realized that there is a lot of math involved, like a lot of statistics, which made sense. I just always thought that the psychological aspect of the game overwhelmed the mathematical aspect of it, and I realized I was wrong, as I are with a lot of things, and actually argue about the book. I argue the idea that humans were very wrong when it comes to randomness. We're not wired to understand it. But anyway, one thing led to another, and I got into it. There was like a couple of years that I even played professionally. It was a lot of fun.
Could you tell me the timeline here? Like how old are you now? What year was this all going down?
Sure, absolutely. So when I started out, I was a graduate student when I was 22. I'm 35 right now. So I've been playing poker for about 13 years. And it all, went progressively. I started studying the game a lot. I played online a little bit. And actually a little bit is probably an understatement. Probably more like a million hands online, maybe two. And then when Black Friday happened, back in 2011, I transitioned to live poker, and also one of the things that I realized is that there was actually a lot of interest, even in places like in academia. There were a lot of people who were interested in learning the poker and what makes poker work. Why is it a game of skill? Where does math fit into this picture? And to make a very long story short, because I don't want to bore you with the details, I actually tried to bring poker into academia, and now I'm teaching poker classes at UCLA.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I wanted to go back a little bit. You played professionally for a number of years, but you've also been heavily immersed in academia and getting your PhD.
That's correct.
And all these other things. So like how did life look like as a professional poker player also immersed in the academia path?
No, that's a great question, Brad. I'm really into math, so I never let math go away, so to speak. I'm a little bit of a workaholic as well, so I would always do a little bit of study or playing on the side. I don't know which one was on the side really, whether poker was on the side or studying was on the side, but it really didn't matter. And it was basically both at all times, I would say. And I'm enjoying this. I view math like I view pretty much everything else in my life. I view math as a game. Here is the challenge, here's the problem, here's the assumptions. How do we get to the conclusion? Try to escape the maze, so to speak. So that has always been my life, like really immersed into games.
And you mentioned that you're a professor at UCLA. Was there ever any thought of leaving the academic space to play more poker or, even something else in the private sector?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thoughts have always been there. But the one thing that I realized is, why not have both? Why destroy bridges that, potentially can be beneficial? And also when it comes to mathematics, for example, I've invested a lot of my time, like to destroy a bridge like that would be a huge step. Taking breaks, there's nothing wrong with that, and try to, be as up to date as possible, again, as humanly possible, because again, there's only 24 hours in a day, but yeah, that was pretty much my thought process. But yeah, all of these thoughts, I've thought about a lot of different things, and the industry, and when I say the industry, I mean it broadly, like, working for like a company, like do some programming and stuff like that. I've had
The reason that I ask is one of my best friends, I can't remember where he was teaching in LA, but he lived in Orange County.
Mm-hmm.
He was teaching computer science there, and he was playing high stakes poker on the side, and he was about to get tenure, and he had a real hard time with choosing. Like, I'm making way more money playing poker. Do I want to choose the path of being a professor when I feel like, my financial upside is somewhat limited? And he eventually moved to San Jose and was teaching at San Jose State. And then before he got tenure, he stopped being a professor and went into like the startup world because he's a computer science teacher. So he went that path, and now he just, plays high stakes poker on the side. But I know that, like, he asked me one time if I wanted to come to his class and like do like a poker lecture, and I almost shit my pants. I was like, no. What are you talking? That's not what I'm built for, man. I'm built for just showing up at the poker table and crushing people. Like,
did you didn't do it?
No, I didn't do it. I was. It was a different time of my life where I wasn't used to talking in front of people. Now I think I would do a much better job. This was probably 7 or 8 years ago. I would do a much better job now than I would back then. But he did offer it, and that's a thing that he was ultra interested in as well, teaching poker and teaching human beings in general.
Absolutely. And I would say, since, I don't know your friend, but I'm assuming you guys probably have chemistry. As long as you have someone to ask you some questions in the class environment, for me, that's top priority. Like, it's always important. I even try to do it a little bit informally, so to speak. I let my students interrupt me, and like, it's important for people to feel comfortable, express themselves. So as long as you have chemistry with a person kind of like in charge of the class, I think you would do a great job, because again, I've listened to your podcast. I don't think you would have any issue explaining ideas and thoughts.
Well, I appreciate the infusion of confidence, Duncan. My friend, he's not so tactful in that sense. He didn't, like, I have no idea of like the logistical, what this even looks like. I never went to college, right? Like, I took a year off for high school. I found poker, and then I was just doing so well at poker that I never pursued any form of higher education because it didn't really make sense to me.
Sure.
And yeah, I have no idea. Like he didn't explain like what it's even like, what it would feel like or be like. So if it would have been you, I feel like you would have done a much better job of selling it to me and, calming my nerves.
Sure. I think communication is important. Like, a lack of communication can create the issue because academia is not just, very much different than basically reading books, and any kind of books, right? I mean, it's just a process. We just read one book after the other, basically. I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but that's the gist of it. So it's not.
Yeah. Again, computer science, very analytical guy. I think that like, persuasion is not his strongest suit in the world.
I see. Then I would love to have you in my class at some point. I know I'm all the way to the West Coast, but if you're ever here, more than happy to have you.
I would love to take my wife, go to LA and have that experience because I have plenty of friends in LA from my time playing at Commerce and basically living there. So I definitely want to go back when in non-pandemic time. And I also just want to meet the people that I've interacted with, the guests that I've had on this show, like in Vegas and in LA and in San Jose. It's kind of sad to me that I don't have that opportunity because of the pandemic.
Speaking of Vegas, Brad, I pre-pandemic, because now it's very weird times, but did you used to go to Vegas? Do you go to Vegas often or?
I don't I don't love Vegas. My wife does not love that about me because she loves Vegas.
She's like my wife.
Vegas to me is like, I'm one of those weird people that likes humidity. Mm-hmm. And when I go outside in Vegas, it feels like I'm under like God's magnifying glass and I'm melting into the concrete. Like, I don't know how anybody could stand it. Like LA, like they have good games. There's always action. The weather is so much better. It's just, I've just always loved LA more than Vegas.
You're absolutely correct. And just like a silly anecdotal story, I decided as an experiment to live in Vegas for a little while, right? So I went, that was during the time that I was playing professionally. So I decided to go there, not for long, for like 3 months. That was, my time period. So I stayed there for 3 months. I mean, exactly as you describe it, magnifying glass, sweating day in and day out, literally and metaphorically. And then when I came back to LA, I remember I took the bus back then. And I remember I got out of the bus and I look at the disgusting floor of LA. And for the first time in my life, I wanted to actually kiss the ground. And I say, oh my God, I'm back to heaven, because it was so unbearable. Like what you're describing right now, And by the way, it was a great trip. It went really well, as expected. Like business-wise, it was an amazing trip. It was as planned, but in terms of, day in and day out, it was a nightmare. It was oh my God. Yeah. So I was like, nope. LA has great games too. So I'll stay here.
Yeah, we are kindred spirits in that sense. The Vegas weather does not agree with me whatsoever. I agree. One thing, I've read some of your articles online, some of your upswing articles. One thing that I appreciate that I don't know that a lot of people do is the way that you're able to simplify complex ideas, because this is something that I spend a lot of time as a poker coach and somebody that creates content. Like, how do I simplify this super complex idea? How do I distill it so that it's executable at the poker table? It's kind of like priority number one. And I think that like it can be a little underappreciated, especially when you lay things out so simplistically. People are like, it can't be this simple, right? But like, that's sort of the point. And yeah, I just wanted to, share your relationship with simplifying complex ideas.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I appreciate the compliment. And, I think it's actually, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I remember reading a tweet of yours today, actually, which I really like, the idea that people would rather be clever than be good, which is actually, I think it really comes down to that concept that sometimes in order to do something fundamentally sound in poker, it's actually quite simple, right? I mean, things like, don't overplay your hand, or, play in position, or have initiative, like these kind of things, which sound very simple, but at the same time, they don't sound incredibly sexy. I mean, that's a boring game, like playing like a tag strategy. And I think that in the end of the day, it comes down to it a lot. The fact that we may overanalyzing things, may make them very complicated. Like, for example, one of the things that, and I may get a lot of flack for this, but this is something that, trust me, I've thought a lot about, is the fact that I think that people, what is the proper word to put it? They overestimate the usefulness of solvers, for example, in this day and age, right? I mean, it sounds incredibly awesome. Oh my God, there's a game theory optimal strategy out there, so we should better learn it, and that should be the only way to,
You are not going to get flack on this show for making that statement, and especially as a PhD in mathematics, this is like, oh, I'm loving this right now. Like, this is a thing that I preach day in and day out. So go on.
It's something that I've studied a lot, and it's something that has like several issues. Like, I could go into like the level of issues that GTOs have, and I don't know if we have the time for this, like, to indulge me a little bit, so I can say a couple of things about GTO if you don't mind. Would that be okay?
Yeah, go as long as you want. This is something that really matters to me, so it's a passion of mine. So
okay, great. Because again, this is something that I so happen to have studied. I mean, from the mathematical standpoint and also from a poker standpoint, very much. And also, not that it means anything, but I mean, I had the good chance of actually teaching a game theory class before. Not that it means anything. That just because somebody teaches a class, that doesn't mean anything. It's not part of the credentials. But I had a professor who used to tell me, Duncan, you don't really learn something until you're forced to explain it to somebody else. So in that sense, like, teaching it helped me actually understand some things that I wasn't able to before. And I'm still learning, of course. This is like an incredibly huge topic, which is going to be part of the reasons why I don't like GTO strategies. And I will explain what do I mean by I don't like. I want to be very clear. So there's basically 4 levels, the way I see it. So the first level is, what is exactly GTO? And there's like very nice definitions of all of those things. Basically, optimal strategies, unexploitable strategies that no matter what the opponent does, we don't care, right? I mean, we grab our a certain amount of profit and we hold on to it, and the opponent cannot take it away from us. Everybody understands that. The interesting thing about GTO strategies is the way Nash actually proved it in 1950s. And I'm not going to go into crazy details, but I do want to give a little bit of a flavor, because I'm sure like intelligent people like yourself and your listeners, they will appreciate it. And you don't have to be a math major to understand what Nash did. So Nash did what mathematicians would call a topological argument. And a topological argument is he looks at a space a certain way. And basically what he said, he used the theorem which is known as fixed point theorem. And what basically says is that if you can imagine you have, like, let's say, 1 billion people. Well, that's a lot of people, right? 1 billion people, and you try to confine them into a large circle. So imagine that you cram 1 billion people into a circle, and to make it interesting, you actually let people hold hands. That would be super ideal, and it sounds a little bit hippie-like. But anyway, let's say that, imagine all the people holding hands. So, and then you let those people shuffle around, but the caveat is they need to keep holding hands. So the people who were near you before, they stay near you afterwards, right? I mean, that is what mathematicians would call continuous mappings. Like, you basically start from a specific region and you end up in the same region, but the points inside the region have shuffled. So that's a topological argument. That's a spatial argument. It turns out, and actually you may think about it and it feels very natural. It turns out that when you shuffle people around, there's going to be at least one person which has barely moved because of the proximity property, the fact that everybody who was next to you before has to stay next to you before. There must be some sort of an anchor somewhere that hasn't moved. And actually, mathematicians can make that precise. And, people are going to come and say, well, Duncan, no, you forgot to mention this little detail, this other detail, which I absolutely do not care. And they can go and they can take, my degrees away. I really don't mind. It's all about explaining. It's not about being accurate when you convey simple ideas. So now what Nash did and there's a reason why I mentioned this argument, because it will make I want to make a point that's related to that later. But what Nash did, basically, he did a very clever argument of doing that reshuffling of people. Of course, instead of using people, he used strategies. And he said, instead of reshuffling people, I'm going to reshuffle strategies. And for each strategy, I'm going to associate a better strategy, right? So he said, if every strategy has a better strategy, then there is no strategy like the person who didn't move. There is no strategy we cannot push any further, if that makes sense. Remember how I told you there's going to be one person that barely moved? That's the optimal strategy. That's the strategy that cannot be pushed further up. Incredible argument, argument, right? Incredible argument that uses topology. And my apologies for getting excited. So
no apologies. We love excitement on this show. That's our currency.
Excellent. I love it. Yeah. So there is a very fundamental issue to anyone who's paying attention, especially to practical people. They will tell you, wait a minute, Duncan. You said there is a person that barely hasn't moved. Do we know who that person is? The answer is unfortunately no. And there lies the problem. So Nash told us brilliantly, right? Very brilliantly. I mean, he won the Nobel Prize for these arguments. He told us brilliantly that there is an optimal strategy, but unfortunately, he wasn't able to tell us what that strategy is. And there lies problem number one.
Yeah, that's kind of a major problem.
That's a major problem. And it's beautiful mathematically, right? It's good to know that it exists, right? But people have spent a lot of time trying to find what that is. So that's not problem number one. Problem number two is that because, there is this difficulty in finding, we kind of have to apply what, your software engineer friend, for example, will say, your computer science, friend, what's his name, by the way?
His name's Tan Tran. Tango is
Tingo. Okay, so Tingo. Excellent. Okay, so Tingo, as he would tell you, is that, like when we have no better way, we will use what is known as brute force. And brute force is basically try every strategy until we find the best one. The problem is, computationally, that's a very difficult problem. So what people are doing, including the solvers, they say, okay, we cannot try every little strategy. So let's start approximating. Let's start cutting things. Let's narrow the ranges to make them a little bit more tractable. Let's cut some bet sizes. Let's not allow all the bet sizes. Let's not allow, let's say, every little increment all the way to 100%, and over bets, let's say 20%, 60%, full bet, twice the bet, and that's it. And then one by one, people are starting to cut a little bit, including the solvers. Which actually brings us to the third point, which is essentially the solvers are not really solving poker. They're solving an approximation to poker, which is another big important issue. And then, of course, there is the issue of implementation. Even if we understood all of these crazy concepts, I certainly cannot do that. I cannot play anywhere near what computers are suggesting.
Yeah, and would you want to? I think that's even more important question.
That's the final issue. I love that you mentioned that, because you clearly have thought about this a lot. It's clear. And the final issue is, would you want to? Because optimal does not mean most profitable, right? And I know many of you viewers already know that. What optimal is, like I said, it's a lock on a specific piece of the pie that nobody can take away from you. But like the metaphor that I'm using is the rock, paper, scissors. That's what everybody understands, right? So rock, paper, scissors, you have a guy like me. I've never played, let's say, rock, paper, scissors before, and I go rock all the time. Now the GTO strategy would tell you to randomize. Respond to that, but you see how much money you're leaving on the table by basically randomizing against the rock guy.
What's hilarious about you using this exact comparison is I have used this exact thing multiple times on this podcast of GTO says randomized, but if your opponent's choosing rock 80% of the time, you'd be a fool not to choose paper 100% of the time, right?
That is correct. Exactly. And that is what poker is all about. That's what makes it exciting. To be very honest with you, Brad, I wouldn't want to sit at a table where I know everybody's using GTO strategies. What's the point? And I'll assume that they're even doing it correctly. Why would I want to play in this game, right?
Another factor that I think is undervalued as it relates to executing GTO is the the part that emotions play on determining our actions and the decisions that we take. Like, humans are emotional creatures, and a lot of the actions taken at a poker table, when you have that pressure, emotions get amplified, and people act based on their emotions. So like, even if you're playing at a high level, your emotions still come into play, whether you're aware of it or not, which leads you to using suboptimal strategies in some spots. And I just made a video on poker coaching for this 30-day challenge starting the new year. And one of the videos was me looking at a solver for a very specific situation that I was in, and kind of showing like, okay, so I raise pre, the big blind 3-bets me, and then going into the solve and saying like, so on this board, 10-7 deuce, I have 8-9, so I have a straight draw, looking at like the exact hand that the villain showed up with on the river, because I have that knowledge on ignition. I can look it up after the fact. I'm like, right here, I know the villain has queen 5 suited, and this villain is never supposed to be 3-betting queen 5 suited out of the big blind. Therefore, how accurate do you think this solve is going to be for this specific situation? When we already see that it's incorrect at decision point number 1. So yeah, it's just like solver. I think of them as like genies, right? Like I think of them as genies that you can ask a question, and it's kind of one of those evil genies that if you ask it a bad question, it ruins your life and gives you a horrible answer, right? So you have to ask very, very good questions where you node lock strategies, and it's hard to have that sort of clairvoyance on the specific strategies that your opponents are using.
Correct. I agree 100%. And the one thing that I want to say, because again, I mean, it's good to give the devils its due, is I think that solvers have their place, so that we can learn a lot of things. Again, as someone who's played chess a lot, I know that engines have helped people a lot. Although there is a difference, by the way, with chess that has to do with the fact that chess is a game of perfect information, whereas poker is not. That's also very relevant, actually. But regardless, there is a place where we can get a little bit of an insight. Like what you describe, right? For example, like specific situations where you have a lot of information, we can get a lot of insight from the engines. But no, it's not the end all be all by any means. We're still playing against humans, and humans have tendencies which can and should be exploited, instead of just trying to protect. Like, take the easy way out and randomize in rock paper scissors, basically.
Yeah, and if you want to prove to yourself that solvers may not be the end all be all, is like run a solve and then change a couple of variables for that specific situation, and just see how the solve changes based on just changing a couple of different variables that may or may not be accurate, right? So it's really hard. You have to simplify, and you have to study very, very specific spots as simply as possible. I think one of the best ways to use solvers, in my opinion, is like river spots, where you have some clairvoyance as to the range, because the range has been narrowed through past decisions. You don't even input flop or turn actions. You just look at the river with the range you think your opponent has, and then you just look at different sizes to sort of, if you're bluffing or value betting, try to find like the most efficient river size to use in this spot. I think there's lots of value in solvers there, because it's not intuitive, some of the things that it spits out. But yeah, for just general like flop play and turn decisions, it's really tough to not only is it really tough to execute, it increases the level of complexity. Like I said, that going back to that tweet, right? Most people just want to seem smart, and they don't want to make money.
That's a good point. I agree 100%. I mean, I ran a similar question, which basically is, do you think you can make money in this day and age without solvers? And actually 40% of people said no. So a lot of people think that solvers are essential, which I thought it was interesting. That's why I agree with that.
Yeah. And see, I run into these anomalies sometime on the podcast, right? We get like the Jason Koons of the world, who are like world-class, there's not 10 people in the world who are better at poker than Jason Koon, and he uses solvers a lot. He uses randomizers, and that works for him specifically. And then I have on the other end of the spectrum is somebody like Mark Herm, who has millions and millions of dollars in tournament winnings. He won 1.5 million the first 6 months of last year, and he actively antagonizes people for using solvers, right? Like he goes for their throat, and it's like, how does this person exist in the wild, right? It's a curious thing, which just leads me to the conclusion that like there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Correct. Correct, exactly. And I actually remember I had one of my students who said, Duncan, do not say there's one more, basically that phrase, there's one more sorry, sometimes one more than one ways to skin a cat. Say there's more than one ways to peel an orange, because she felt uncomfortable because I was making the same argument, basically, right? That people are different, and to certain people, certain things work better. You know, some people are more organized, some people are more intuition based. It's perfectly fine. And I actually try to make that argument on my book. I'm trying to say that just because something works for Alex, it doesn't mean it's going to work for you. It's important to find the thing that works for you, provided that it's sound in a certain way. And one can make a sound argument for and against the engines or the solvers, however you're going to call them, in this case.
Yeah, I think it's just a thing that, you know, another tweet that I made a few weeks back was like, people in general just want an answer, and they don't even care if it's a bad answer. Like,
that's actually very true also. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a big problem as it relates to solvers, because I think honestly, like, solvers are keeping the games good in some respect, right? Because people can't execute the strategies and they believe in them dogmatically. Right. And then they just can't succeed. They keep failing and they don't understand what's happening. Right. So I think in some way, like, solvers in an odd way have made the games better because people are overconfident and over-reliant on the use and, you know, their expectations. But
absolutely. Actually, there's a very nice, excellent book that talks about how people used mathematics. The title escapes me right now. I have the mentioned in the book as well, but it talks about how to take advantage of gambling, how math can be used to take advantage of gambling. And one of the arguments they make in the book is that when Edward Thorpe realized that blackjack can be beaten, right? So he wrote that book, Beat the Dealer. There were, for every one so the casinos freaked out. Let me say that right off the bat. The casinos freaked out and they said, you know what? We're not going to let anybody do that. At the slight hint that somebody's counting cards, you know, we're going to bar them. Until they realized that for every one person who knew how to count cards correctly, there were about 100 who had no idea how to do it properly, and they were losing more money than they would otherwise. So they started selling those cards. Say, no, please come and count cards for us. Yes, please. You want to do this? It was amazing. It's true. Like, it's very, like, there is a lot of danger in misapplying concepts, especially when we're talking about razor thin edges and very difficult margins and ideas.
Yeah, and it's just really hard because this is just right in my wheelhouse. Like I said, this is a thing that I think about a lot. The difference between like intuitive leaning people and analytical leaning people, and like I'm somebody who I view myself as, you know, I think we're all on the spectrum. Sure. But I view myself as leaning intuitively. And I realized through talking to an analytical guy who like runs aggregated reports on Pio, and he's like, you know, he's a crusher at the highest stakes on Ignition. And we were having a conversation, and like most people, the process is like theory to exploitation to like hand incentives. And I went about it the complete opposite way of hand incentives. And from hand incentives, I understood exploits. And then I understood, if I'm exploiting a strategy here, there must be some theory on top of it. They must be making a mistake. So from the exploit, I learned the theory. And like, I just want to put it out there as many times as I possibly can on this podcast that like, that's okay if that's how you're constructed. If you sit down and like the theory doesn't make sense to you and it's hard and makes poker not fun and dots are not connecting, again, you can attack it from a different angle that resonates with you, and eventually you will get it. And I think that like that's a failing of poker training on the market that just forces people in the box of analytical from the very beginning.
I agree 100%. I think that's a bigger mistake than following an incorrect strategy. Like forcing somebody to be someone who they're not can lead to huge issues. And sure. And I agree with you, and I encourage my own students, you know, like say, Duncan, what should I do with that hand? Sometimes they tell me, and say, what do you think you should do? Like, try it. It doesn't matter if it works or it doesn't. I mean, you're going to get experience either way. Try a few different things. Do not try to play my strategy. try to formulate yours, make mistakes, understand what these mistakes happen. And that's the important thing. As long as we learn from our mistakes, we improve. If we don't make mistakes, or if we don't understand that we're making mistakes, if we don't see errors, if we do not attempt even to make mistakes, then we cannot improve. Like, we make mistakes and we don't even understand it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of times we make fear-based mistakes that are on the passive end of the spectrum. And I always challenge my guys, and for the listener out there, like, make a mistake, make an aggressive mistake, follow your intuition, get involved in a funky spot, and then afterwards you can review it and gain takeaways and wisdom that you can apply forever in the future. So, like, just because you lose money in a hand doesn't mean that you're going to lose money over the course of your poker career from that hand. You can extrapolate, you can gain the wisdom from that experience and take it with you. And I think that that's another thing that, like, people are afraid of. They're afraid of making mistakes. And, years back in my Skype group, when I was first coaching poker, somebody asked me a question and I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Sure. Like, let's investigate it and let's see, like, try to come to a conclusion. And then afterwards they were like, yeah, man, I really like that you just said, I don't know.
That's
like,
honest. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I don't know. There are lots of things that I don't know, and lots of situations in poker, even after 16 years, that, like, I don't have a clear answer and I need to dive in to gain clarity. So yeah, absolutely. Don't be afraid of saying you don't know, and don't be afraid of making mistakes. Those are opportunities for learning and opportunities for growth.
I agree 100%. I mean, as long as we're learning about mistakes, right? Because some people feel bad about the mistakes. I'm like, it's a great opportunity. That's what we want. We want to see the mistakes and improve upon them. Absolutely.
Yep. And whether or not you feel bad about your mistakes or not, you're making mistakes.
That's exactly right.
You may not feel bad about them, but they're there. I promise you, every session.
Every hand. That's right.
Yeah, maybe even every hand. Jason, tell me about presence. Why did you think presence was the missing weapon in the arsenal of poker players?
So everyone's a mindset champion when they're running great, right? But when you're getting crushed day after day and you haven't booked a win in forever and the confidence just gone, and you're trying to do this thing that you read about in a book or someone told you about, being logical and being happy that the money went in good, when all you really want to do is cry and hit something at the same time. Like, how are you supposed to be logical in that moment? But that's the only moment when you really need it. What you need in that moment isn't mindset. You've already read all the mindset books and you already know what you're supposed to think and what you're supposed to do. What you actually need in that moment is presence. Presence is the ability to connect the dots between who you want to be and how you can actually be that person when you need it most.
So let's cut to the chase, right? Like, how do you do it? How do you stay more present when you're at the poker table?
Well, you get there by first deciding that you want more, right? That you want to grow your intuition, that you want to create more flow in your life, and that you want to reach your full potential as a player and as a person. And once you get there, you can start trying out some of the exercises and practices that I've put together. And if it feels good, if you're enjoying it, you can keep going. Right? And if you keep going long enough, eventually you'll find that you're just playing at really high levels, that you feel good with low stress, and you're enjoying your experience a lot more. Not just at the table, but away from it as well.
I personally would love to have as much presence as I possibly can in my day-to-day life. And if you, the listener, right now wants to add some presence to your game, visit pokerwithpresence.com, join Jason Su's email newsletter, and then schedule a free consult with the master of presence himself. One more time, that's pokerwithpresence.com. So let's kind of go back. You're teaching, you're a professor. You start writing poker articles. When did you start getting involved in, providing poker education for the world, kind of marrying your academia and your hobby, your personal interest?
Right. So that kind of started slowly. So like I actually had to think, when did that thing start? But I mean, I was able to trace it back at around 2014. When was the first time that I started teaching some classes to broader audiences, like as part of a program called UCLA Extension, where people were able to come in and from all different backgrounds. And then from there, the classes expanded, and I started, dabbing into writing a few articles, mostly to vent out a little bit, say some things that, and also start a conversation, because for me, a conversation is actually incredibly important. I like to be challenged myself, and I encourage my students to challenge me in class, and it's not because I think it's some sort of contest. I always view myself as a fellow student. So I think that the difference between the instructor and the student is that the instructor has a little bit more experience. But other than that, we're all students and we'll try to figure out a bigger problem. So, yeah. And because of that reason, like I always like when my students interrupt me, they ask me questions, but Duncan, what if my opponent is completely random? Like every decision they make is random. It's very difficult for me to adjust. What do I do? Let's think about it, right? I mean, I like this type of questions. How about ace king? I mean, ace king is a very complicated hand. Why do you say it's a good hand? Let's think about it, right? I mean, what is it? So I like that kind of stuff. So that's progressively, to answer your question, that's how it started. It's a need that I have for challenge, for a constant back and forth, so that like day by day to try and suck less, basically.
what I love about that is like there's a clear visual, right, from Nash and that topographical way of looking at game theory, where like you have your strategy and like you're holding hands and you're letting your strategy be challenged, right? In an effort to find the next level, the next more, the next better strategy, which I think people ought to do. Like you always, it's a fine line to walk between being assertive in the decisions you're making at the poker table while also having the humility to kind of ask, like, this was a good play. Is there a better play, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think everybody ought to be challenged very regularly on their poker thoughts, their ideas, their theories, because through those challenges, that's where the growth lies. It may not be fun when somebody pokes a big hole, but ultimately, like if somebody is able to poke a big hole in your strategy, like look at that as kind of
an opportunity,
a benefit for you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I do want to dive into something that is very near and dear to my own heart. Like you're an award-winning teacher. Your parents are teachers.
That's correct.
For the listener out there, I wanted to ask you, what are some, tells, some ways that they can evaluate, say, if they get a private poker coach, if that coach is a good teacher? Like, how should they be thinking about evaluating somebody that they're making a sizable investment into, and also giving them their trust?
Oh, no, I think that's a great question. I think I don't mean to sound cheesy here, but a lot of the conclusions that they're going to reach are going to be instinctive, and I think that there is a reason why we have those instincts. So I would say to trust their instincts. I'm going to give some more rational answer to this, but
tell me the instinct, though. I want to go down. Like, let's dive deeper. Like, what's that feeling? Where does it manifest? How does that feel?
Right. So if you're speaking to someone that you have that feeling that they may make sense, but at the same time you feel like they're trying to sell something to you, or you have that feeling that something is not as it seems, but you cannot put your finger to it, just trust that feeling, because there's a reason why we have 3.5 billion years of evolution, right? I mean, our bodies have let us have evolved to protect ourselves from danger. So we have ways to recognize those dangers. So even though we may not understand those things very well, it's important to trust them. So at the very low level, like without putting any rationality into it, I would say the instincts matter, right? That's why sometimes Phil Hellmuth calls the white magic, right? I mean, that's what I would call instincts, which is, no need to call it more fancy than it is. I love Phil, by the way. He's a lot of fun to watch. Okay, so then at a more rational level, I think you mentioned one of the points already. Like people who are not afraid to say, I don't know. If someone comes to you and they say they have all the answers, chances are they're lying, because to this day, I haven't met a person in my life that has all the answers. So it's confidence, not faked knowledge, right? So not projected fake knowledge, right? It's okay to be confident. Like a perfect example of that, like the epitome, I would say, of like the well-known poker players and educators, that would be Phil Galfand. Very humble, incredibly knowledgeable, right? Incredibly knowledgeable. And always ready, to improve. Like he took this first challenge with Veni Vidi, expecting to lose, by the way, because he thought, I haven't studied any of the GTO strategies. And he actually, to make a connection to the previous question, by the way, incidentally, Phil Galfond tried to play GTO a little bit. He started losing the challenge. I don't know if you follow that at all. And then he reverted back to his old style, and he actually ended up beating Veni Vidi, which is another pretty interesting victory for non-GTO strategies, just as an aside. But anyway, so yeah, my apologies, I got sidetracked here. But yes, so instincts and the idea that they shouldn't have all the answers. And another point I would make is, are they willing to be challenged? Because an educator is not there to feel smart for themselves. It's there to help you with something. So if you really are having a question and the educator is telling you, no, that's nonsense, like it means that they do not take you very seriously. Like it does not matter one iota if your question has been answered a million times before. It's an important question to you. So do they respect the question that you're asking? Or do they go like on, other, tangents and try to put into your head what they want to put into your head, I would say. Because a real educator communicates with you. A real educator does not try to tell you this is the lecture, follow it, or you get an F. A real educator is, okay, let's try to explore what's going on, what people before us tried to do, why it worked, why didn't it work, what did you try today? What did you try today, Brad? Did it work for you? Why do you think it didn't work? What is your issue? Let's talk about it. Let's peel the onion and see what's inside and try to layer by layer find out what we can do about it.
Yeah, and one of the tricks I pull out of my tool bag is like, if there's a disagreement, right? Because there is a disagreement in strategy in these coaching sessions a lot of the time where, I think a strategy is better. They think a strategy is better. It's like, okay, let's just challenge it, right? Like, let's just look at the data and kind of explore and see which one of us are right. So, basically like we make you disagree, like, let's try to prove it and see where we end up at the end of the day. Because, there are plenty of times where I've learned things from my students who approach something from just a totally different angle, right? And it's like, oh wow, I thought that play X was likely going to capture the most EV, but now I'm kind of on board with play Y that you came up with. So, again, just watch Phil Galfond playing heads up against, I believe it's Bill Perkins on Twitch, and the amount of times that he says, "I don't know." I think that I should be betting pot here. I don't really know. He says it constantly, over and over and over again. Yeah, and if Phil doesn't know, then for the love of God, like, what do us mere mortals know?
That's right. That's exactly correct. Yeah, no, exactly. And also nothing. One of the things about not just the I don't know, but the idea of challenging. The reason why I think challenging a statement is so powerful is because if a proper communication ensues after that challenge, we can't go wrong either way. Either the person who's asking that question, they're right, so we're going to learn something new, or they were wrong in a certain way, so we're going to help them, move into the right position. Either way, that's a good thing. Like that discomfort is important in education. Is what I like to call healthy struggle. We gotta struggle. It's important, but we can't be all. I had a friend of mine when I was a kid. He used to say, when two people are agreeing, they're not talking, they're gossiping. So there is some innate disagreement that needs to happen, and that's because we're trying to implement new knowledge of the world into our current knowledge, and that's going to be painful. That's going to suck a little bit, or maybe that's an understatement even. So
I think that like it's just people's fundamental approach to arguments. There was a Tim Ferriss interview. I can't remember who he was talking to, but they were talking about just arguments and like who are the real winners and losers, right? The people that treat arguments as like war, where it's like they're going to die on their hill no matter what. It doesn't matter what you say, they will die on their hill. And it's like if you lose an argument, you gain knowledge, you gain perspective. You're the one that actually comes out of that challenge for the better. So like losing an argument is not a bad thing. It's actually a positive thing because it means that you you grew, right? The person
right.
who defended their side of the argument, they didn't gain anything. They solidified why they think about this thing the way that they do. But yeah, it's mindset, it's perspective. And I think emotions, human biases kind of muddy the waters as it relates to those kind of challenges.
Absolutely, Brad. And you know, I actually coined a term for what you just described, that idea of losing an argument, because one of the issues I had, I was thinking to myself, basically what you just said, right? If there seems to be an issue with what you just described, right? Which I think it's actually pretty interesting. What is that issue? On the one hand, we know that we don't know everything, right? We know that we're lacking knowledge in everything. Like there's not a single statement. I mean, I've been studying like math and poker all of my life, and the things that I don't know, they're way the things that I know, they're not even, 1% of all the things that I do know, right? So I'm thinking to myself, if there's so many things that we don't know, like how can we ever say the word I know? On the other hand, if you go into a conversation and you always say, I don't know, nobody's going to take you seriously. So we have an issue here, right? So that is something that I've been thinking a lot. Like, how do we resolve that issue? And one potential way one can resolve that issue, what you call losing an argument, because I don't like to think of like having arguments, because to even have an argument, it means that you have a solidified opinion on something, and that's dangerous. So how do we rectify the situation? And I have a concept which I call it meta-humility. Like, it's the idea that when you talk about a subject, be as confident as you can be, because it's important not to sound smart, but because if we're confident, it means that you give your best to support that argument. It's not that you believe in it necessarily, but you give your best to support an argument. You give your best efforts to paint that argument in the best possible way. Why? Because if the person you're talking with finds holes in that argument, it means at least you did the best, so the argument is not strong. This is what I would call meta-humility. We know that these arguments may have holes, but we're still being very confident at them because we want to give our opponent the best opportunity. We want to strengthen our opponent to poke holes at them. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. Like, these are greatness bombs, and I love like the language that you're using there. And it's pretty clear to me after I spoke, and then, you talked about the meta-humility.
Right.
It's like, the language around this problem ought to be changed so that we approach it from a different angle, which again is, very near and dear to my heart as well as it relates to poker, because I think language is very, very important. And I think poker language in general is quite shitty, to be honest with you.
Sure.
So yeah, that's oh man, I love that. You're speaking to somebody that thinks about language and these kind of things very in depth and spends way more time than I'm even comfortable verbalizing on this podcast. Just thinking about like simple concepts and breaking them down, and asking questions about like, does this language make sense? Are there ways to think about it better so that there's more value, there's more gained from the interaction?
I agree 100%. And just to clarify, because again, sometimes I hear the questions from my students in my head, and some of your listeners may ask, well, Duncan, why don't you just call it humility? And the reason why, just to clarify, I mean, you got the point already, but just for the listeners perhaps, is that the reason why we cannot call it humility is because like, you don't want to see someone like, let's say, the world champion in chess, like Magnus Carlsen, to go and say, oh, you know what, I'm not very talented. That's fake modesty, right? They cannot be humble. He has to be confident. He needs to say, I'm the best in the world. That's true. He is. Like, but it has to be meta humility, because it sits on a different level. I am the best in the world, but I made a great play, but maybe I was wrong. I am the blank, but there's always a but, and that but sits at a meta level. It doesn't sit on that level. It's still very confident, because we do not want to lose the confidence of the very successful people that we have. That's an important confidence, and we don't want them to be like fake modest. Oh, you know what? Yes, I mean, I was blessed with. No. People have to be, if they're skillful, they should say that, yeah, I'm skillful. That's what I do well.
It makes so much sense to me, because the poker application is clearly there as well, right? Like what I mentioned earlier about being assertive, having the confidence to make a decision at the poker table that you believe in, even if everybody else doesn't believe in what you're doing, and yet still humble enough to question it. But that humility, like, you gave it a different level, right? The meta humility.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Man, this is going down in the record books. One of my favorite podcast interviews. Like I love all these things.
I have a lot of time in my hands, I guess, so I think about those things these days.
Oh man, yeah, we have a lot of time to think. That's for sure.
Yeah.
What's the most unexpected thing that's come from your poker journey?
So it actually infused in more than one ways. And I think that to connect to the previous conversation, it infused a lot of humility in my life. I used to be a very, and I still am to a great extent. That's one of my disadvantages, if you will, my weaknesses. I used to be very cocky, like as a kid, incredibly cocky, and I was like, there's no luck in life. We make our own luck, all of these things. I was a very cocky son of a gun. And this is something that I work to this day. It's like, you make your own destiny. It's like, try your best. And what poker, taught me, and it was quite a huge slap in the face, I should say. Poker taught me that, sometimes in life you do the right thing and you get penalized, and sometimes you do the wrong thing and you get rewarded, and sometimes things do not go your way, or like people like Phil Galfond has said in the past. We should not underestimate the fact that some of us, talking about like elite players, some of us as in Phil Galfond, not people like me, we started and we got really lucky at the beginning because we ran harder than the sun at the beginning. So when we didn't know anything about poker, and then we thought, oh, this is a moneymaker, so we stuck around. There were equally intelligent people at the beginning and equally talented people, if you will. Intelligent, I don't know if that's the right word, but talented people at the beginning who actually didn't run as hard as we did, and they ended up dropping out of poker before they were able to realize their greatness. So there is a certain luck element to it, not just in poker, but also in real life, right? And I don't need to go to extreme examples, like people getting like some sort of terminal disease out of nowhere. And
the way that I try to frame it, I'll frame it for the listener, is you need to get gas. You've got 20 miles until you run out of gas, and the next gas station is 10 miles away. Right. You stop at the gas station, you get out of your car, you slip in a puddle and break your leg. Was the decision to get gas bad?
Right.
Exactly. No, it was a good decision. It was just a bad result, bad outcome from that decision, right? It's obviously a shitty decision to just keep driving and have no gas and break down on the side of the road. Yeah, sometimes in life you do the best that you can and things just don't work out. That is an element of being a human. And honestly, I kind of like that element of chance as it relates to the human experience.
Yeah, I don't think poker would be the same, by the way, without the element of chance. Like at some point I pondered the idea, again, cockiness, right? Wouldn't it be better when we were all in if, everybody was getting that EV share? Terrible idea. One of my terrible ideas. I have a list, by the way. Maybe we can do a podcast of all of my terrible ideas. A lot of those. So one of my terrible ideas was that, because I thought to myself, it's more fair. But that element of surprise is what makes people want to play the game, and will drive people away from the game.
Yeah, it's we need that chance, right? I think that, like, I was in a casino one time and thinking to myself, like, what does a casino sell, right? And I realized that casinos sell possibility, right? And they sell dreams. When you go dreams, and when you play a hand of blackjack and like you bet whatever a meaningful amount of money is to you, and the dealer is shuffling the cards and then they're exposing the cards, like ultimately the value that we gain is that experience, right? That tentative experience of not knowing the outcome and what's going to happen next. And ultimately that's what the casino sells, is that experience of pressing a button on the slot machine and thinking, well, we could hit a jackpot. We probably won't, but the possibility is there. And that emotion is there. And poker is the same. Like, you get it in and, you have aces against somebody else has jacks, and like they spike a jack, right?
Right.
That feeling, the same with the casino, is there. And I think that's just a big draw. It's what allows people the short-term luck where they can have great success despite not being a super strong player. And that's very appealing.
Very appealing. And that's, by the way, I know a lot of my mathematicians friends are going to start throwing stuff at their screens right now. But the thing is that, that's how you turn a minus EV lottery ticket into quote unquote plus EV, right? Because there is the external value, the extrinsic value of the dream. So some people pay for that dream, and it's perfectly okay. So, mathematically speaking, it may not make sense to buy a lottery ticket, but if someone puts value on that dream, who are we to say don't buy it?
That is another greatness bomb, and something that I've never even thought about the lottery in those terms, but you're absolutely right. The emotional gain you get is likely worth it if that's how you're wired, and it gives you some sense of happiness, right? Like if you're wired in that way, the emotional gain outweighs the monetary loss, and that is a really big deal. Changing gears for a little bit, when you think about joy in your career, playing, teaching cards, what's the first memory that comes to mind?
Yeah, so it's actually fairly recent. I would say one of the most joyful moments. Funny enough, it wasn't about me. It was when my wife she actually binged her first tournament, and she actually didn't know how to play poker. And I remember at the time it was an amazing feeling. Like I don't, I'm very biased, though I love her very much. So, but I remember because she didn't know anything about poker at all, and I said, I'm writing this manuscript. Do you want to take a look at it? And then she actually read it. She's like, oh, I can apply some of these things. And she, not the first tournament she played, obviously, but when she actually did it, it was like a beautiful moment for me. I don't know. It felt really, really joyful. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny how other people's experiences, we kind of get the joy from those experiences. In my case, sometimes it's even more, like you said, more than what we feel, right? Like a friend plays a massive pot and wins, and I can just feel how happy they are about that result.
Exactly.
And it makes me happier than winning a big pot sometimes. Like it's a strange thing. The opposite question. So when you think about pain in your career in cards, what's the first memory that comes to mind?
I guess that would be one time. That's the first thing that came to mind. Just being honest here, I have a lot of poker is a love-hate relationship, as you can imagine. But I had a moment where I broke what later became like my number one rule, and that is never bring more money to the casino than you can afford to lose. And that was a night where I did 2 withdrawals from my ATM, and I felt it wasn't like life-breaking money or anything like that. Although I shouldn't be excusing myself now, it's just that I felt I lost control, and that was something for someone who likes to be as organized as possible. That felt like I wasn't in control, and that hurt me.
Yeah, emotions. They're hell of a thing. They drive us even when emotions beat logic 10 days out of 10, and that's just how we're wired as human beings. And again, I wouldn't have it any other way. I think that most of the joy in life comes from just these emotions, just excitement, fear, angst, anxiety, love, anger, passion, all that stuff.
How about yours? Like joyful moments, like best or worst moments? Like what would you say?
I would say for me, joyful moment. What immediately comes to mind is just a hand that I played very early on in my career, where I made a call with third pair, playing uncapped, a big uncapped game, and what was then maybe like a 2-5 game and like a $4,000 or $5,000 pot, and just looking at the data, making a read on a specific player, and then executing. And being totally right. It was like this dude has Queen Jack. I just knew.
You knew the exact hand.
I knew the exact hand. It was I think I had Queen 5, and the flop was 10-5 deuce, and it was a shitload of ways pre-flop, and
beautiful.
It checks around, and I was looking at the guy, because I'm always looking at people, trying to see how they react to the flop and how they react to the board, and he just not interested at all. Check back. The turn was a 9. And I bet out, and he raised me really big. And I was like, this just doesn't make any sense. Pocket 9s is going to consider betting here. He wasn't interested at all. So I called, and then the river, I think the river was an ace. And it was I checked, and he made a massive bet. And I was like, well, whatever, let's go.
When a scare card is not scare card, that's what Phil Galfin used to say in 2008.
Yeah, when a scare card is not a scare card. I think that just that hand, maybe a year into my career or so, playing professionally, solidified that, like, yeah, I trust myself. I'm good at this game, and I'm going to be able to do this for a long time if I so choose. And so that's a moment of joy, right? It was like validation of my career choice.
Absolutely. That sounds like a great moment. Yeah. And I don't want to, bring you any pain by remembering your painful moments. So you don't have to share that.
Yeah. Pain is it's a lot more difficult to quantify because I sort of spin the painful moments in my career. I look at the long game, and even Black Friday, I look at as a blessing that changed my life for the better, which is, so I think that there are lessons to learn even in the painful moments. And yeah, so I don't really have anything for pain off the top of my head. Although if you gave me enough time, I could come up with a very clear answer to that question. What would you say is the most high impact action players can take to improve their game?
I think, I know this is going to sound like very weird, but I would say mindfulness, and I don't mean it in a necessarily like in a metaphysical way, but mindfulness would be an example. Like, let me paint a picture. Sitting at the table, you're not involved in a hand, playing on your phone. I would say that that's probably not going to help the game, because one of the best ways for someone to improve would be to take advantage of the data. You mentioned data before, of the data as they come to them. So you're sitting at a table, here's data presenting itself to you. You have an opportunity to learn from other people's mistakes. And then because it's boring, one plays on their phone. So I would say mindfulness, like be present in the moment, try to see what information you can extract. Because again, I'm talking mostly about live play, but also that applies online as well. People are playing, see what they're doing. I like to play mini games sometimes, Okay, so putting people on ranges, when I'm not involved in the hand, and then try to see if I'm right or wrong. That can help because this is you're more efficient at the table. You try to take advantage of dead time, essentially.
Yeah, and you're getting data that can inform future decisions, right? Like
Correct.
In my play and explain videos, one of the things that I try to do is, even in hands that I'm not involved in, I look at the behaviors, the actions my opponents are taking, and I'm like, oh, that's weird. Like they used a weird sizing there on the river, right? Like you never know when that information is going to be the difference between a big call and a big fold, and how much of your win rate actually hinges on those little data points they're publicly available, right? Anybody can access them. Right. So like, it's just a shame to not pay attention to it and to like miss something where your whole evening could hinge on, if you were paying attention and had this data point, you would have chosen an action in this massive pot, and you never even know. Like you think you got unlucky, and reality was you just weren't paying enough attention.
I agree 100%. I think it's very important, and a lot of things. I'm talking about that idea. That sometimes it's important to an incorrect assumption is better than no assumption at all. But without, what do I mean by that is that, like if you have an incorrect assumption, at some point you're going to get contradicting evidence. And if you do get contradicting evidence, that's great because you're going to improve upon. But in order to get the contradicting evidence, you have to pay attention. Yep. Because there's never going to be a contradicting evidence, if we're not paying attention.
Hard to disprove a theory if you don't have a theory.
That's correct. Exactly. It's important. It doesn't matter how crazy it is. That's why I like my students when they tell me crazy things. Yeah. So it's important.
Oh, it's vastly important as somebody that plays poker to just pay attention and collect data and parse the information and prioritize. And that's how you level up your game. That's how you make better decisions in the moment at the poker table.
Right. And it's actually difficult. That level of concentration is actually difficult.
Oh, in today's day and age, it's especially difficult because, guys like my friend in Silicon Valley, the software developer, like I learn exactly how behind the scenes work. And, they pay somebody $500 an hour to spend 10 hours developing the perfect color that optimizes use of their app. Right. And they gladly do it. Yep. Mm-hmm. Everything is optimized in that way. You pick up your smartphone, like there are billions and billions of dollars invested into taking as much of your attention as humanly possible. So That's actually why I have a little flip phone now, because I just got sick of it. I was like,
I
can't win. I can't win. Like, the billions of dollars is going to beat me every day of the week, and I want my attention back. So I put it down. And as it relates to poker, though, like this,
I love it.
This stimulation, always getting that dopamine hit when you get a notification, when you check your phone, it's a major problem as it relates to focusing, being in the moment, when it matters at the poker table.
I agree 100%. I think that's incredibly important. You're just better than me. I actually don't have a phone at all. So that was a conscious decision I made a few years back. So I'm basically, when I need to, when I say I don't have a phone, I have a landline. I don't have like a cell phone. I'm actually like terrified, because it started a few years ago. Now I'm terrified to actually have a device in my hands. It's going to be so distracting. I'm thinking I'm not going to get anything done in the day. So
yeah, everybody like that I've told thinks that it's crazy. Actually, they don't think it's crazy. They think that's a great idea, but I could never do it because of X, Y, Z, right? Like that's the qualification.
Right. My friend tells me that all the time. Oh, you're brilliant. And he has he's staring at his 2 cell phones.
Yeah. Like my wife was the other, maybe like a year ago, she was on her computer, right? And she was checking her email, and like, I could see the email up, and then she was on her phone also checking her email at the same time. And I'm like, what is happening here? Like, this is just how powerful and how great these developers are at pulling our attention. It's a battle that we can't win as human beings. So the only way I've decided I can win is to remove myself from having the opportunity.
I think that's great. And actually, just to be fair, I think technology overall has more benefits than disadvantages. We just have to find the proper way to implement it into our lives. And I don't think that's I don't think that's my solution is the best solution by any means. So that's part of the list of terrible ideas, like not having a cell phone. That would be right up there. But I'm sticking to it for the moment because I don't have a better solution. But yeah.
I think that it's a good tool, but a terrible master. And right. that's just kind of how I frame it. And by the way, you get a flip phone that like, you can't like, you'll just use it for texting and calling. I promise. There's nothing else that you can do. I
like that idea. I didn't actually know that they were flip phone. I mean, it makes sense.
You can go to like lightphone.com, and they have specific phones designed as tools that don't allow you to do anything other than like call, text, listen to podcasts.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Learn something every day. I love it.
There you go. Look, I totally get it. You feel like being a lone wolf in your poker journey has hamstrung your ability to realize your full potential. So I'm about to give you a golden opportunity to plug into a supportive tribe that will be the poker family you've always wished you had. How much money would you give for 1 hour of interactive group coaching led by myself, Coach Thomas, and occasionally past guests of the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast? For now, and this will absolutely change at some point in the near future, the price of admission to the live Poker Power Hour is 100% free. All you've got to do to get your invite is head to chasingpokergreatness.com and hop on the VIP newsletter. No more excuses, no more procrastination. It's time to take action and put yourself in position to turn your poker dreams into reality. I hope to see that beautiful face of yours in just a couple of days. What do you think folks who chase their poker dreams don't spend enough time thinking about?
Bankroll management. I would say, like, I know it's very, very, very practical, but that has been like for all the conversations that I've been having with people, and like even my students, they get a little bit bored when I start talking about that stuff. There used to be, and I mean that with a lot of love. There used to be a quote from Doyle Branson. I remember when I was starting out. Every poker player, once in their lives, they've gone broke. That was the quote. So it wasn't that he's saying he should go broke or anything like that, or they should go broke. His argument was that it's kind of inevitable. That quote always bothered me a little bit. Obviously Doyle, a legend, and he lived in different times, and also we can argue with data. So he says what's out there. So it must be the case. And actually, I had a lot of friends with similar issues. But the reason why that quote bothered me is because I always felt, how can you be a successful businessman if you allow your company to go bankrupt? So I always felt that's a major issue. Now, it's understandable to say, okay, I'm going to take a lot of risks, but not a lot of meta risks. Again, thinking at a higher level. So for example, I mean, some people who have like many jobs, they will say, listen, I mean, I'm going to take my poker bankroll to the extreme, but I have this side income, so I'm protected that way. That's perfectly fine. But I found people, who were taking like shots, like especially in those high stakes poker games, how many professionals and really big names and their stories, how they ended up, which is very, very sad. I mean, these successful people who ended up being either broke or near broke or not being able to play. And then we have all these scandals of, all of these loans that never get paid back and all of these things. And I think that is incredibly important. And, when people like Dusty Schmidt, for example, said, treat your poker like a business. I think that's a valid suggestion. It is very, very important. We can't afford to go broke. To me, like going broke is the
ultimate sin,
so to speak. Yeah, and I want to be very understanding because like there is a lot of variance in this game, and a lot of things can go bad. But basically, what I would say is that just think as if everything that can will go bad. No, like kind of like as in worst case scenario, not as in a pessimistic situation, but because bankroll management, to me at least, that's why when you ask me about a painful moment is when I actually went into this rampage of no, I can beat these guys because I'm better, and to me that felt, well, Duncan, if things didn't go your way, you're getting one step closer towards bankruptcy, which is a big no-no. So
yep, and there's an argument too that most successful business owners do go broke early on. Their businesses do go bankrupt early on, and their wisdom and lessons that you can learn. But I remember reading Mike Caro, and Mike Caro wrote a lot about bankroll management back in the day. I think very underrated poker teacher, early poker teacher. And he said like money for the poker player is like that is your tool, right? Like it's the equivalent of a printer selling his printing press to like pay for life, right? Well, congrats, you paid for your life, but now you have no way of making money moving forward. So like protecting your bankroll becomes at some point paramount importance. And I want to be clear too, because I've talked about this a bunch of times on my show. Like I don't care about protecting $2,000. A $2,000 bankroll means nothing to me. Like, it's like you can get a job, you can save money, and you can rebuild that sort of small bankroll. But like once you have 100,000, now that's something that's worthy of protection, right? You don't want to go broke from that point. So you have to practice responsible bankroll management, whether that's, one of my guys in my group, he's a crushing MTC player. He sells action now. Like he sells action in the group because he doesn't want to go broke. And sometimes you just got to do that so that you survive, so that you can make a career. And, I say all this with the knowledge that like Phil Galfond, the man that we've spoken about multiple times, came on this show and like he was a shot taker, right? Like he had an $800,000 bankroll and he lost half of it in one night. Right. But he was able to move down and then rebuild. And I think that he's more the exception than the rule as it relates to that. Most guys, they lose $400K. They're likely to lose the other $400K before they move down. So yeah, I think knowing yourself, understanding your emotions, just being logical and treating your situation as your own and trying to do the best that you can.
Absolutely. And to be fair here, because I don't want to sound like I'm preaching or anything like that, I do want to reiterate the fact that we said earlier, it really does matter what your situation is, right? What the situation is. Your question was, what is the thing that people are not thinking about? I'm not saying that people necessarily should not go broke, but this is something that they're not thinking about. That's the answer to your question. And for example, like early on, people can take different risks than later in life. If you know your situation is that you're already kind of almost broke anyway, you might as well take something. I mean, you're young, you can do other things. That's that as long as you thought about it, as long as it's a calculated risk, like the Phil Galfond story.
I was like you, very arrogant when I was younger, and I at least got one thing right. I knew that when I was 20, that if I went broke, I could just get a job, and nobody depended on me. I had a safety net, so. There you go. If I went broke, I still had options. And so going broke wasn't that painful. It wasn't something that I feared that much. Plus I was 20. So generally not afraid of things because of just pure stupidity. Like I've had, as a 20-year-old,
that's the best way of putting it. Yeah.
Like I went from playing 5-10 limit to 5-10 no limit. I remember multiple times early in my career where I had my entire bankroll on the table in front of me, like playing in uncapped games. And it didn't seem like that much of a risk because nobody was really depending on me, and I had safety nets in place.
But you like the way you're thinking about it, you're thinking in terms of meta protection. You're meta protecting yourself, right? So you may be incredibly risky at the level of poker, but you have all these other plans, like all these safety nets. So to me, that's fine. That's what I'm talking about. If you thought about it clearly, I'm saying that people,
don't think about it. Yeah,
exactly. From the conversations I have anyway, So this
sometimes you ought to be riskier with your bankroll, and this is a situation that popped up from somebody that I'm close to. They were getting staked for a very long time, and they were successful every single year, month in and month out. They're winning poker players, but they weren't able to earn enough money to build their own bankroll. So they couldn't kind of get out from under staking. And I'm like, dude, you just got to save up $5K and take shots with that $5K. And like, eventually it'll stick and then you'll be on your own, right? Like if you go to zero, you just save up again and take another shot. But like, the money you can gain by not being backed is so much more that you just kind of have to be risky and trying to build your bankroll. So again, there's no one size fits all solution. Just logic your way through it, try to come to a good conclusion and do the best you can.
Absolutely.
Opposite of that question. Yep. What do you think folks spend way too much time thinking about?
Bad beats maybe, or like, bad things that happened. I would say so. And when I say bad beats, I mean it not, my aces got cracked. I'm talking about, like that moment where, I bubbled out this very important tournament, or, I topped at I bumped at the top of my opponent's range and things like that. And I think that there is so much variance in this game that these things can actually wear us out eventually, right?
I want to get a little bit more meta with that because I totally agree with you. I think people spend way too much time trying to manufacture ways to get out of unavoidable scenarios. Like they get set over set and then they start like, how could I have prevented that? Was there another way to play this? And it's like, no, like it just happened and it's a bad thing and it sucks. It doesn't feel good, but like, you couldn't change it. We can't retroactively go back and like change our strategy to avoid that situation, especially if it's a really solid and good strategy. And I think that's what causes people a lot of angst. They don't have an anchor. Their strategy has no anchor. They're trying to, alter their strategy to avoid all kinds of bad situations when like that is not the point of poker, and that will drive you crazy. And that's a recipe for disaster.
Recipe for disaster. Can I make a suggestion for this, which I also, something food for thought, not necessarily a suggestion, which also happens to be the largest chapter of my book, because I think this is a very big issue. May I?
Yeah, and also tell us about your book, because I certainly want to spend some time talking about it too.
No worries about it. But because of that question, it's the idea that that inevitability that you're talking about, right? I think that inevitability is highly tied to randomness in many ways, right? And the idea that like little things, that our aces against their kings, they're only 4-1. They're not going to win every time. We're about to lose, or the fact that sometimes we're going to have the second nuts versus the first nuts and all that stuff. I think, although we cannot attack this rationally fully, because a lot of it is emotional and it has to be attacked emotionally, and that, I guess somebody else's territory. The one rational thing that I'm going to say about it, I feel that there is a perspective switch that it's at least worth trying it out for some individuals. And what is that perspective switch? Are you familiar with like the famous quantum experiment, with the cat, Schrodinger's cat?
Schrodinger's cat, like you killed the cat when you discover it.
Right, exactly. Which is that idea, which by the way, now I'm going to anger all of my physicist friends, right? They're going to say, no, this is not the interpretation. But let me very, very simply simplify. The idea is that basically in quantum mechanics is that sometimes things in a certain sense are and aren't at the same time, is what they call superposition, right? They're in this fuzzy situation. And then Schrödinger came up with this idea to explain how ridiculous that is. He basically said, wait, if things are and aren't, can I create like a quantum mechanical switch that basically does and doesn't go off and kills and doesn't kill a cat? So maybe the cat is sitting there, which is dead and alive. And of course, he was pointing out, the craziness of quantum mechanics. This is known as, when you open the box, is known as the collapse of the wave function. But I do think that there's an incredible, helpful tip for poker players there, even though clearly this is, has nothing to do with quantum mechanics. The idea of the cat being dead and alive at the same time is helpful to poker players because it teaches us the concept that just because our opponent had hand X, it doesn't mean it's the only hand they can have in that situation, right? And this is an idea that people are very familiar with. Oh yeah, Duncan, you're talking about ranges, of course, right? But I'm talking a little bit more about that. I'm not, because in actuality, we know that our opponent has a specific hand, like your opponent had Queen Jack. That was the hand they had. It wasn't magically something else. However, if we convince ourselves that we're kind of, and of course, this is a thought experiment. It's not reality, but it's a good proxy of reality, I would argue. If we convince ourselves that we're playing against not one opponent, but we're playing against 1,000 different opponents, and we just so happen that we were shown Queen Jack, but that hand was actually not always Queen Jack. Sometimes it was Kings, sometimes it was a set, sometimes it was something else. Basically, by showing us the Queen Jack, we don't know we lost, right? Because it could have been the other opponent with the king or whatever the situation is. Just by showing one hand, it doesn't mean anything. So like in poker, I would summarize it. A hand is not relevant for the hand we just played. It's only relevant for future hands because it gives us information about what our opponents could be doing, right? So that's the idea that our opponent didn't really have that hand. He had a mixture of hands. So that hand, and I know it's very rational, right? And I'm very well aware that, there are emotional aspects in place. But I find often that like people are very mad at themselves because the opponent actually ended up having hand X. And then somehow deep inside they feel they should have thought about hand X. Even David Sklansky, when he talks about the fundamental theorem of poker, he says, if we could see our opponent hand. But the idea of if we could see our opponent hand is actually distracting because it makes us think that our opponent has a hand, even though I like to believe that our opponent does never have a hand, has something that goes like this, a fuzzy mixture of things. So if we just take a glimpse at one piece of that fuzzy mixture, we really don't get the full the full mixture. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You're both right and wrong at the same time.
I love
it. You're when at the moment that you make the call, you're both right and wrong, and yeah, it's a hard thing to internalize that.
Right.
You're playing against a range. I mean, it's a hard thing for a lot of folks to kind of come to terms with. Right. And yet it's absolutely essential that you do come to terms with it if you want to be successful as a poker player. And I think too, like you get data, you get feedback on like when you're really wrong, right? When you make a call and you're like, somebody has a hand that you never even considered. Is like, wow. Like, again, going back to what we said before, like an opportunity to learn, upgrade your thought process and ask yourself like, did I miss something that I could have used to do a better job of analyzing this hand? Tell me about why Alex beats Bobbie at poker, developing a fundamental why, Chris, you can edit that out. Why Alex beats Bobbie at poker, developing a fundamentally sound approach to poker. Why did you write the book? And, why should the listener go scoop it up on Amazon?
Well, okay. So one of the main questions I've been trying to answer in myself is, why is it poker a game of skill? I mean, we all understand there's the chance element, but why the skill part outweighs the chance element? What is it, that professional poker players do better than amateurs? So essentially, this book is my attempt to try and answer that question. So I'm trying to answer that question. Why is it that money flows from amateurs to professionals in the long run? And it's surprisingly difficult for myself, anyway, I noticed, to vocalize some of these ideas, because intuitively we play a lot. We know that certain things are just quote unquote better than other things, and we just do them. We know that that we should be folding like 7-deuce. The 7-deuce is somehow worse than 3-deuce, and we kind of like 3-deuce, and we kind of do these kind of things instinctively. But I was trying to dig deeper, and I was having these voices, so to speak, in my head, which are basically my students, and asking all those questions, and pestering me, and I mean it lovingly, of course, with all. I love these questions. Why this? What if my opponent is that? What if my opponent that? So I was trying to dig deeper and deeper to fundamental essentials. Why is it that poker is basically a game of skill? And I try to basically break it down.
Yeah, and that is a tough question. That's a tough.
You know what? I'm glad you say that's a tough question, because I have people say, "Come on, poker is easy, man. You have to be patient." Like that. It's like, no, I don't think so. At least it's not easy for me. So, I'm,
it's not easy for me to quantify exactly why some people are better at poker than others, and it kind of goes back to a question I asked myself maybe 6 months ago that made me feel a little bit shameful for never even asking the question. And it was like, why do I have a base pre-flop strategy? And it was a question that I had never even considered. I just have one, and I didn't consider like the strategic element of it. Like, why do I have it? Why do I trust this? Why does this thing exist? And, that exists at every single level and every single point of the decision tree. Like, why do I have confidence in this spot? Why do I believe in my ability to read other players' intentions and choose a counter strategy towards what they're trying to accomplish? And it's very complex. Like, again, the level of complexity just goes through the roof. And if you're able to distill that in this book, I mean, that's like magic to me. Like, that is incredible achievement.
Let's call it a start. Like I'm trying my best to answer those questions, and I guess one of the that's why I have to warn the listeners, because I'm constantly answering those questions in my head, or I'm attempting to. That's a more accurate way to answer some questions in my head. This book also has like something like 300 plus footnotes, which I try to put them on the bottom, because there's so much nuance, and I can hear my students screaming, "But Duncan, what if my opponent has a flush draw here? What if they, I hear these kind of objections, and I think they're valid objections, like all of them. But at the same time, it is important to get to the bottom line first, and then try to build nuance from there. Otherwise, things can get overwhelming, right? There's clearly like a lot of details in all of these things, and in quantum mechanics, Nash's theorem, and my attempt is not to butcher any of that stuff. It's just to give like a first flavor, so that we can build from there and then go into the details next.
Yeah, and again, like, it's a hard thing to prove. It's a hard thing to exactly quantify. And like, it's extremely nuanced, and yeah, that is a challenge that I'm glad you undertook it and not me, because just teaching people poker and improving their games and figuring out where they're going wrong, identifying leaks and suggesting upgrades, even that is like all consuming. How do we do this simply? How do I transfer knowledge? How do I get them to ask the right questions? It's all way more difficult than I think anybody else really can appreciate.
Thank you. No, this is very much the fact that you appreciate how difficult that question is. Actually makes me feel very, very, very good, because that's one of the things that I thought people would say, "Oh, Duncan, you're talking about the obvious stuff." And I thought if it was obvious, like, we wouldn't have any controversy around the game. The game would be completely legal. We wouldn't have any issues. So
yeah, it's certainly not obvious. And yeah, it's like a weight on me just even imagining that question.
And just to give you like a very quick idea, so that, because I also like to be practical, it's not, I mean, here we're talking about, I mean, the gist of the book, but like I'm trying to look for innate properties. And what do I mean by innate properties of the game? I don't know if you played any chess at all. Do you play any chess at all, Brad? Okay. Basically, you know the basic idea, though, two opposing armies, you know, and one of them controls the white army and the other one controls the black army. And it turns out that the white army always starts first. So that actually, we have evidence that suggests that on average, the database shows that people who start first, they have an edge. They have a 3% edge. I forget what the exact number is, but they have a meaningful edge. So to me, that's an important question. And these are the type of questions that I'm trying to relate to poker. Like, why position gives edge to people? Why card advantage gives edge to people? You know, how can people save money in like, how can get in a situation where instead of betting 8 blinds, they can get away with betting 7 and things like that. So trying to understand these kind of things, and also randomness, which is a big a big subject for me, very complicated subject. Randomness and our disability, my disability before everybody else's, to feel randomness intuitively and how to work around it and all of these mental constructions.
One of the books that we've gone through is Rock Break Scissors, and it's all about randomness and humans' inability to be random. And like, we're just not, we just can't.
Absolutely.
What doesn't feel random is a lot of times actually random, and you know, what feels random is almost never actual randomness.
That's exactly correct. It goes back to random number generators, which are not real. It's basically pseudo random. Yeah. It's a very good point. And for your listeners and for yourself, Brad, there's also another great book by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, Fooled by Randomness. He's the author of The Black Swan also. So they also talks about that. And randomness is something, it's an interesting beast, to say the least.
It is. And, you know, like I said earlier about language and investigating language, like I have investigated just the words that we use to describe the actions we take at the poker table, right? Like, I bet. And what's interesting about just saying that you bet is there's like, it's like a tool, you know, there's like 5 or 10 different things that you can be trying to accomplish with this bet, but the word itself is so not specific that that we often verbalize, I bet because of X, Y, Z. And I'm like, why don't we just call this exact bet a thing and give it a name so that we know what we're doing intuitively? And like, even thinking about all the multi-uses of like a bet or a check or a call, even that is overwhelming. And it's extremely simple to think about, but it's overwhelming finding all the utilities, giving them precise definitions, and making sure that, you know, they're executable in game.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because these are basically the last 2 chapters of the book. I'm trying to dissect the bet. And what is it like? What does it mean to bet? You know, what is the intrinsic value of a bet? What is the extrinsic value of the bet? And like, it's you know, again, so whether or not, you know, I succeeded, you know, only time will tell, you know, but I'm more than happy to discuss those things with people who have questions. And, you know, it's,
when we get off here, I'm certainly going to be getting your book and diving in and reading and learning more, because this is like right up my alley. It makes me excited. We have a couple lightning round questions, and then we'll get you out of here, man. If you could gift, speaking of books, all poker players 1 book to read, it doesn't necessarily have to be about poker, what would it be?
The Black Swan.
Why The Black Swan?
Oh, okay. I thought there was a lightning. I was like ready to.
Lightning-esque. I do like to know the why.
Okay, and I was like, I was ready, and I was leaning. No, I would say because this is probably the epitome of randomness from one of the top experts in the world, Nassim Nicholas Taleb. He is like a tail risk expert, so he understands. He talks about things which go beyond the controlled environment of poker, where randomness gets even crazier. But I think it would be a very good exposure of poker players to randomness, to realize that this is like a real untamable beast. So that can help with now creating some sort of respect for what variance is, and be ready, because sometimes part of the reason why I feel, at least again, and a lot of it is also personal experience, part of the reason why randomness has been difficult for me is that because it was hurting my ego a lot. And it still does, to a certain extent. So I feel that once we understand that beast and we understand that it is pretty much nothing we can do about it, our ego doesn't get hurt as much. Does that make sense? Right?
It does, for sure.
Yeah. So it's the idea that, I guess it was my cockiness, the fact that I thought I could rise above this randomness because of my facial hair. I don't know why I thought I could do that, but for some reason, but understanding what untamable beast it is, I think that would be, non-poker. So go ahead.
I was going to say, I went back to watch like Stu Unger's performance when he won the WSOP, maybe the second time, and they didn't really have hole cards up, but the announcers would talk about the hands when they get it in, and like he got it in bad like 3 times in a row and like won every one, right? And it just goes to show you that like you need to run good. Like whoever, like Chris Moneymaker obviously had to run ultra amazing to win all these guys. There is this massive element of randomness that everybody is victimized by, or they're either victimized or I guess heroified. I don't know the exact.
No, that's good. Yeah.
But and we just have to accept that. That's a fun part of life. Again, the unknown. It's not fun knowing how everything is going to turn out always.
Right. And speaking actually of Stu Unger, you reminded me of another book, One of a Kind, which is basically a documentary essentially of there's actually an actual documentary and a book. The book is amazing, has a lot of stories. It's actually a cautionary tale, I would say. It's an interesting cautionary tale for every poker player. I would say that these cautionary tales, together with books like, Treat Your Poker Like Business from Dusty Schmidt, also known as Leatherass, these are, I think, books that are more helpful than the strategies themselves, because it's easier to build the strategies when the fundamentals are solid and sound.
Yeah, and I did a Poker Goat challenge trying to find the best poker player of all time. Just a little fun experiment on Twitter, and I had a really tough time ranking Stu Unger. My heart wanted to rank him much lower than I feel like the population viewed him as, just because, I've heard lots of stories that like he was a very emotional guy that had some huge downside into letting his emotions kind of take over, and that to me makes you lesser of a poker player at the end of the day.
The disadvantage. That's right. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
All right. If you could erect a billboard, every poker player's got to drive past on the way to the card room, what does it say?
That's an interesting question. I've never thought actually about that. In a billboard.
It's right up your alley, because simplifying a complex idea. I can see this is a tough one for you.
Yeah, that is indeed it's a tough question. I may sound cheesy, but I would probably say 2 words: be yourself. Be yourself. I think, again, it sounds very cheesy, probably not, but I think this comes down from a little bit of my heritage there too, from the ancient Greeks. I think the idea of like knowing thyself, know thyself, that idea, I know it's a cliche these days, but the reason why I'm saying this is because part of be yourself has to do not try to imitate things that you heard somewhere else. Whatever you do, try to make it yours. So if you don't do it well, it's going to be easier to change it because it's yours to begin with, right? So it's going to be yourself, not somebody else that you will never be able to imitate. Nobody can do you better than yourself. So
I love that. That is another greatness bomb, and I absolutely agree. Be yourself. What's a project you're working on right now that's near and dear to your heart?
Yes, near and dear to my heart, and I probably shouldn't be working on that project. I'm actually working on a project talking about the concept of with everything that happened recently with the pandemic and all of the difficulties in communication, and that's where actually the idea of meta humility came from. Again, the poker background helped a lot. So I'm trying to dissect a dialogue. How can we humans create a conversation so that we're able to listen to one another while maintaining like that meta humility, that where there's so many things that we don't know, and yet we can open our ears and listen to one another, because I feel it is something that we need desperately, the idea of a dialogue. And I am so afraid to get this thing out there, because I know that this is a very controversial subject, but that
doesn't matter, man. You're doing the noble work. That is absolutely something that society needs more of. And, it's, we live in the disinformation age, and we live in the age of false narratives and people getting hunkered down in their beliefs as if all of their beliefs are the capital T truth, and nothing could be further from the capital T truth. And yeah, just creating a dialogue and having conversations and realizing that, like, I don't want to live in a world where I feel like everybody ought to believe all the same things that I believe, you know? And I also don't want to live in a world where I feel like I can't defend anybody's different beliefs than my own. So I have to be consciously aware of what everybody believes all the time and respect that. I just think that, like, seek forgiveness. People believe differently than you. That's the human experience. And have dialogues, and sometimes those dialogues are going to be tough, and sometimes you're going to learn that maybe you're not as smart as you thought you were, and maybe you should have changed your perspective or whatever. But again, it doesn't feel good, but that's how you grow. You never grow if you have all the answers and you're always right.
Very well said.
Thanks, man. And again, you're doing the noble work, and I'll be excited to learn more about that project whenever you put it out there. And final question is, where can the Chasing Poker Greatness audience find you on the World Wide Web?
Yeah, I guess the easiest place to find me would probably be on Twitter at another cheesy title. That was the only that was available at the time. That was 8 years ago that I got. At Ask, A-S-K, the Math Dr, doctor, so to speak. Ask the Math Dr. I don't really like it, but that's what I found at the time. So at Ask the Math Dr, or by basically Googling my name, Duncan. Now the last name will be a little bit of a challenge, to be honest, to Google. But Palamourdas. So it's and I also have the website with the same URL, askthemathdr.com, which is like the only thing I found available at the time.
Yeah, and Why Alex Beats Bobbie at Poker on Amazon, D&B Poker Publishing. I'll have links and click-throughs on chasingpokergreatness.com, so you'll be able to find Duncan, all of his work, and check it out. Thank you very much, sir. This was one of my favorites of all time. I don't say that lightly. I really appreciate this, and would love to have you on again sometime in the very near future.
Sure. It was a great pleasure, Brad. Thanks really for having me.
Yep. Thank you. Take care.
You as well.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Chasing Poker Greatness. If you have yet to subscribe to the show, please take a second to do so on Apple Podcasts or wherever your favorite place to listen to podcasts may be. For more content from me, Coach Brad, please visit our YouTube channel at youtube.com/enhanceyouredge, and I'll see you next time.